Matt, thank you for joining me on this first video interview I've conducted for Comic Book Yeti. How are things going in Sydney?
Yeah, things are good. Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be your first. This is great.
It's my pleasure. So jumping right into things, Inferno Girl Red, Volume 1, provided a wonderful amount of insight into the development of the characters and evolution of the creative collaboration between you as a writer and your artistic partner, Erica Durso. So how did you meet and decide to put on this story, put it together, and how has it evolved over the 2 volumes of collaboration? Did anything shift concerning preparation of the new volume's material as you were developing it?
Yeah, I mean, we searched a long time for Erica. So Inferno Girl Red was an idea I had a long time ago about how to take another swing at superhero comics, specifically that might draw in new readers. Because I was a really big fan of Ultimate Spider-Man growing up, and that was my
Okay.
sort of path into reading comics sort of full time. And I love it, but it is also 2 decades old now, and it feels it in the sense that it doesn't necessarily reflect the modern teenage experience. And we wanted to create something that did, but was as exciting as that, but also being accessible. So even if you haven't read comics before, you can just jump right
Mhm.
in. So we had all of these goals, and I knew I wanted to center the story on a teenage girl, and I knew that I'm not that, and a female perspective would be very helpful. So
Yep.
we wanted a female co-creator, and we searched for over a year. It was painstaking finding the person with the right skill set, um, and also the willingness to jump on board this crazy experiment. And eventually, it was just asking around to artists about who they knew who was coming up and who had the skills, and someone recommended Erica. And then as soon as I saw her work, I was convinced that she was the right person. And thankfully, once I pitched the story to her, she was really on board and excited. And I think from the start, we've had a great
Good.
working relationship because I think she is really on board the nature of the story, and I'm very, very open to her contributing to the world and changing its direction and bringing her personality to it because there's so much of Erica in the story. So I think when it came to
Yeah.
doing the second book, it was really just about knowing each other better and knowing what we're good at and making sure that we're setting each other up for the for success as much as possible. So if it's just a bit of fine tuning, but I think it's just the same great relationship we've always had, thankfully.
That's great. And it's good to hear, it resonated with her. The interplay's been really clean throughout. But before we explore what you're up to with this latest release, can you provide our audience with a truncated journey through how you found yourself working on comics in the first place? What did you grow up reading besides, you mentioned Ultimate Spider-Man? Was there anything else
Yeah.
that really factored in there? And how did it become a part of your professional portfolio in recent years?
Yeah. Well, I was sort of brought into comics by Batman the Animated Series, which I think is a pretty common story for people my
Yeah.
age. I just fell in love with Batman, and then wanted to seek out more Batman. And comics were kind of hard to come by where I grew up, but one day I took a journey to the sort of next town over, and they had a combination record and comic book store
Nice.
that sold trades, and there I picked up a Justice League trade because my thinking was like, that's good value, right? I knew I wanted Batman, but if I can get these other characters, fantastic. And that turned out to be a Grant Morrison JLA. I think it was at a point where there's a bit of Morrison, there's a bit of Wade, and someone else.
Oh,
And it's
okay.
like Zoriel, Shaggy Man, Huntress, Plastic Man. It's so many deep cuts of the DC universe. I was thrown
Yeah,
right in the
yeah.
deep end, but I was excited. I was like, oh, I don't know any of this, and I want to get to learn all about it. So from then, I was all in on superhero comics, and I sort of always had the ambition to write them. And storytelling has sort of been a big passion of mine my whole life, and I use that passion and those skills in a commercial sense, right, working in a creative agency.
Mhm.
But it was through a podcast that I met Kyle Higgins, and we got along like a house on fire and chatted all the time. And one day he said, like, oh, have you ever thought about writing comics? And I said, yeah, that's all I want to do, but I didn't want to be that friend who like leans on. He's like, hey, can you get me into comics? So he asked me to write a sample script, 20 pages just to see what I could do. And I did that. And he's like, oh, great. Yeah, I love this. I want to take it around to publishers and I'll be the editor. And I was like, oh, I thought that was a sample script. I wasn't sure like what this would be, but yeah, I'm not gonna say no to that. So that became Self-Made, my first ever creator-owned series. And we came up with a list of publishers that we wanted to pitch it to in order of preference, with Image at the top and then working on down. So we went to Image and they said yes. And I was not at all prepared for that eventuality, but it was a thrilling entry because there's so much creative freedom. And it was that creative freedom that really inspired me to get started on Inferno Girl Red, because having that complete freedom comes with a lot of responsibility in my eyes. And I felt that I wanted to use that responsibility to create something that brought in new readers and tried to push the medium forward. So that's how we ended up here.
Yeah, well, that's not a bad batting average to start out with. So,
very fortunate.
Yeah. But, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Kyle, because the next question was around you telling me a bit more about Black Market Narrative, and you mentioned how you became involved with it through podcasts and meeting Kyle that way. But how did you end up working on the Ultraman series together?
Yeah. Well, I think that was really just, like Kyle and I are great friends and we chat all the time. And I think like we have different titles on different projects, but our collaboration is more fluid generally. Like and it's not just Kyle and I, it's Ryan Parrott, Melissa Flores, a bunch of our friends. We all just chat about our work, right? And we help each other out from time to time. And that's a very natural relationship for us. So when Marvel came to Kyle and asked him if he was interested in pitching for Ultraman, he's like, yeah, that sounds like a cool opportunity, but also I am completely snowed under. If I could get Mat Groom to help with this, then I could pitch. And they said, yeah, sure, why not? So we put together a pitch and they went for it and we were off to the races. And I think like Black Market Narrative is a very like formalized representation of a big part of who Kyle is, in that he just loves connecting talented people and getting cool projects off the ground and helping bring this stuff to life. I think he's like, we don't really have producers in comics, but he, on top of all of his other things, he is that. And Black Market Narrative allows him to do that. It allows him to help launch a bunch of things, either in a formal editorial capacity, like an Inferno Girl Red, or on the other like Massiveverse projects or other things that are, on the way. It allows him to just sort of give them a push and help them get out the door, and make sure that they have the best chance to succeed. And I think it's really fostered a really cool collaborative environment, and I'm very grateful for it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I've seen, like, I haven't dug in. This is actually my first introduction to the Massiveverse, and that pertains to my next question. Yeah, no, I mean, so because I came back to comics over COVID, basically. I've been doing all this sustainability work, and I was kind of just not in a creative space whatsoever. And then COVID hit, and I realized, like, I could die at any moment. Why am I not doing things that I actually care about and am passionate about, on a creative level? And so I just started digging back in because, like you said, there aren't producers in the same sense. You can do it just, you by yourself if you're a good enough artist, or with one other person if you can write and they can draw. So, it's to dig a bit deeper into the collective, what does your participation look like? And there are a number of different models. You mentioned Image for Self-Made. Black Market Narrative is also building this connected world, the Massiveverse. For me, I just started with Inferno Girl Red Volume 1. Where does it fit into the mix? What else can you clue me into, giving away what's happening?
Well, so with the Massiveverse, that came about because I was working on Inferno Girl Red. At the same time, Kyle was starting his own creator and superhero series called Radiant Black. Ryan Parrott was starting his own creator and superhero series called Rogue Sun. And these are all sort of in development at the same time. And in talking to each other about it, as I mentioned that we did, just like jamming on what we're working on, we realized that there were some similarities. And I think part of that is that we've all worked on Power Rangers in the comics. So we have that connection and there's like those influences. But we also realized that they were very distinct in that they felt like they were carving out their own little niche. And the conversation then became like, these are all creator-owned properties. We could just have them cross over because we're the ones who get to decide that because we're in control, right? Like no one could stop us essentially. But then we got to talking about the pros and cons of that. And we thought there was some really cool stuff you could do there, but we were also very wary of how that can derail things or make things complicated. I think
stepping on each other's continuity, that sort of thing.
Like we were all very cautious of making our lives harder for each other, which we did not want. But also like Kyle and Ryan had experiences at the major publishers where crossovers had in bigger and small ways really just kind of like thrown us better in the wrench. And we never wanted to do that. So we were committed to finding a way to build it where we could have beneficial connections without throwing off anyone's plans and, very importantly, without making the reading experience complicated. So in the Massive Verse, you can just read Inferno Girl Red, book 1, book 2, hopefully book 3 and onwards. Or you can just read Radiant Black, or you can just read Rogue Sun, or Melissa Flores' The Dead Lucky, or Kyle and Brian's No One. And you will not feel like you're missing out on anything. There's no like, oh, you're not going to read issue 5 of Rogue Sun.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember, looking through Daredevil comics, and I was like, I don't want to go back and read The Punisher now.
Totally. Yeah. Like, I think the nightmare scenario for us is those little editorial boxes where it's like, you'll understand this if you read this issue over here. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to avoid that at all costs, but we wanted to be able to enjoy the benefits of like jamming together. So we found the best way to do that was once a year we've been doing these crossovers called Supermassive that are like oversized one-shots, usually about 50 pages, where the characters meet and the story reflects where they are at their current journey and might give you a bit more insight into their world and you get to see how they all interact, but it's self-contained. So if you don't want to read it, that's fine. And you won't feel like you're missing out on the other stuff. So it allows us to do that. And it also allows us to do cool other stuff. Like we, next year, we'll be releasing a fighting card game where the heroes and the villains of the various series are playable decks in that, which, we could only do because of our sort of like collective clout and being able to offer that as a thing. And, the hope is that there'll be more things like that down the track. And it also means we can encourage fans around the universe. Like if someone reads Inferno Girl Red and they're really into it, and then they read Supermassive for that reason, then they might, be introduced to Radiant Black and think that's really cool and then want to chase that down. So it's hopefully mutually beneficial.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I guess, I've got a couple more questions about Bad Blood, the other card game that you've been working on. And I'm interested to hear how that came into the mix as well. But beyond, we were talking about your initial pitch to work on Ultraman with Marvel. You also, cultivated ties to heroes at the pinnacle of the whole Japanese Zentai suit genre with your work on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And that was a huge part of my childhood, like elementary school. Power Rangers, I had the action figures, I watched the show. Can you unpack how your fascination with the genre arose and how you brought that experience of being steeped in those genre conventions into the Inferno Girl Red development process? Because I can see, there are definitely some strong elements of it in there in terms of costume design and some of the, the aspects of the universe mechanics. So how did you both utilize and break with customary conventions and aspects of that subgenre of superheroism? Because it is a subgenre of sorts.
Yeah, absolutely. I very much as a kid was all in on Power Rangers. I think in some ways, even more so than Batman, it just got its hooks into me. And then as an adult, my fascination got reignited because my friend Michael Basudel and I started a podcast where we go back and watch episodes of Power Rangers as adults and just sort of like see how that experience is from the lens of adults. And that has been a fascinating and bewildering little experiment and one that has been going now for 10 years. We'll be recording our
Really?
10-year anniversary this weekend, actually.
Congratulations. That's a commitment.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's been like we've done 500, 600 episodes, something like that.
Right.
And it was how I met Kyle, because he was doing press when he started on Power Rangers. We interviewed him, and that's how that kicked off. And my co-host Michael is now the editor on basically all the Massiverse books. So it was very foundational for both of us. And I think as I learned more about Power Rangers, particularly as an adult, I then learned about Super Sentai, which is the show, the Japanese show that they cut into little pieces and then reshot some extra scenes to turn it into an American show. And from Super Sentai, learning about Kamen Rider and Ultraman and the Metal Heroes and all the other tokusatsu shows.
Right.
And I was just fascinated by the differences and the similarities. And I think there's some aesthetic things and style things that are just really cool. But I also thought there was a lot of aspects of the storytelling that were really interesting and I thought could be really beneficial if brought into consideration when telling Western superhero stories. And I think there's a lot of different elements to that. One of them is that tokusatsu heroes often aren't interested in defending the status quo. They have very specific missions. And they're trying to make change in the world, which I think is interesting, especially now at a time when the status quo for most people isn't great. So superheroes who just make sure nothing changes maybe aren't the best sort of heroes for us now. But they're also much better at endings. They will tell a finite story and then wrap it up and move on, which I have a lot of appreciation for. And there's a real boldness to it where they can tackle really meaningful and difficult themes, but also have a zaniness isn't quite the right way because it feels like it's belittling, but I've just like truly boundless creative expression and not be afraid of how different those things are. As an example, I've been watching a Kamen Rider series called Kamen Rider Build, which is about a scientist who creates weapons of war because he believes it's necessary to protect his people, but then has to reckon with the implications of that, both sort of on his soul and then on society, and all of the sort of like the deaths that weigh on him against the deaths that he prevented by creating these weapons.
Right.
But also he can turn into a combination of a rose and a helicopter by putting two vials together, which turns him into a guy who could like has rotors that also shoot rose thorns. And to them, those two things aren't incompatible. Like you can go to the absolute extreme ends of creativity and also have that represent a very meaningful and nuanced story. So we wanted to try and like bottle some of that and also bring in, you know, my own like Western superhero influences and also like I love like boarding school dramas and coming of age stories. Put all of that in the mix and see what comes out.
Cool. Yeah, I've got, a few kids. I've got daughters who are early teens now, and they're getting very into the boarding school drama stuff. And I remember with my son trying to watch the original Power Rangers film. I thought it held up pretty well, actually. I was pleasantly surprised after not watching it for, about 20 years. It's like, oh, yeah, it's still entertaining. Yeah. And, he got some enjoyment out of it. So it wasn't so dated that, a kid with fully modern sensibilities lost his way. So, looking at the rest of there I have lots of questions, but I'll just keep barreling along. So, I do want to spend a moment on Igor Monti's coloring work and Becca Carey's lettering. So Igor comes off of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers as well, and Becca's done work on Radiant Black, so I'm sure they were part of the mix and you were aware of them through these titles. But what connected with you about their work, and how did you end up selecting them to help you bring Inferno Girl Red to life?
Yeah, well, with Igor, actually, I think it was before he started on Mighty Morphin, we had noticed his work on a Mega Man series. And it was at the point where we were just looking for colorists, and we weren't really sure what direction we wanted, and we needed someone who would work really well with Erica, obviously. And we were just immediately blown away by his work. And again, it felt fresh. It felt like a new perspective on coloring. There's a vibrancy to it and a color that is so bold. And it was that boldness that we needed.
Yeah.
And I think what we also discovered as we worked with him was his ability to work with light is unparalleled. And that became a very important aspect of the series, because it is very much about light in the darkness, and trusting him to handle all of that in a very literal sense, paid off in a big way. And I think as soon as we paired his work with Erica, I was like, yes, this is it. And thankfully, both of them were just very excited by each other, and
That's good.
work really closely together and push each other. So that, it's one of those, when it comes together like that, it's so relieving. And then,
very vibrant, the result.
It's so vibrant. It's gorgeous. And with Becca, we needed a letterer, and we're looking at all of the options. And Kyle recommended Becca because she works on Radiant Black. And I was a little very impressed with her work on Radiant Black, but I didn't feel like it fit the tone of Inferno Girl Red. But we talked to Becca, we took her through the story and asked her to do some pages. And what she came back with was note perfect, exactly what we wanted. And I think that's because Becca has a really incredible ability to flex her style and make sure that it's expressing the core values of the story. And I think for Inferno Girl Red, there's a real organic quality to it, in that it can go from emotional moments to very soft and warm, but then when things pop off, it's incredibly sharp and vibrant and explosive. I was again just so impressed by how Becca flexed her style to be able to make it fit with Inferno Girl Red.
Yeah, and I think text can certainly amplify the character of the character of characters, and just the character of a story in many ways. And I think that ties in neatly to the next question, which was around your work for a design firm for the people. Yeah. And in recent years, I assume attention to text is a very important part of that role. But, so you mentioned your fellow Sydney-based designer, Michael Bucidil? Is it Bucidil? How do I pronounce his last name?
It's a hard one.
Yeah.
Bucidil.
Just the cadence there. But as part of that creative team, so how does editorial and design input take you from that raw creative process you and Erica engage in toward that polished, finished product? How do you know when something's done? Can you break down that workflow a bit regarding, who does what at what point in the process, and when you've got a finished product?
Yeah, well, I think working for the people was a very educational experience, because they are a very small agency. When I started there, I think we were 6 people, up to around 15 to 20 now, which is a lot more, obviously, but still small. But doing international quality work, winning awards around the world and holding themselves to the highest standard. And we got there by being very flexible in our collaboration. It was just about jamming together in the room, checking our egos at the door, and making sure that we were all just trying to help each other, be the best versions of our creative selves. And that's definitely something I wanted to cultivate in my creator-owned work. And I think that's what's helped us out. And it, in practice, what that really just means is that you're anticipating the needs of the people that you're working with, and you're also very eager to iterate based on what they bring to the table. So I'll write an outline, I'll send that outline to the team, and they'll tell me what they think of it, and then I will adapt that outline based on what they think. Then I'll write the script, again, same process, and then Erica will start doing layouts, and based on layouts, I might again adapt the script, and then she'll do finished art, and then based on the finished art, I may go back and completely rewrite the script again in the dialogue sense, because of what Erica's brought to the table. Maybe she's communicated something in the art and I've realized like, oh, I don't actually need to say that. Like Erica's got it, right? I can just strip that back. And I know that Erica and Ego work the same way in the art sense. Like Erica will try something and then Ego will see him go, oh, that's great. I think I can do something with this, but I might need you to change that. So she'll change that and then send it to him and back and forth. So it's just like, it's not the most efficient process. It takes a little while, but I think it gets to the best result where we are helping each other push ourselves forward rather than just treating it like a factory line where we just pass it along to the next person.
It definitely sounds thoroughly collaborative, which is good.
Absolutely. Yeah. Luckily, we all really like each other. It helps a lot.
Yeah. If you're not butting heads over things, then that amount of interaction wouldn't be a problem. But I can see where, if it's a strained relationship, you would want to just deliver something and say stick to the script. But yeah,
absolutely.
Within the world though, the world that you've built for Inferno Girl Red, there are various dynamics at work, and from Volume 1 alone, which I haven't seen Volume 2 yet. I know that one's still, waiting in the wings, but Volume 1 was fantastic. I've got a number of questions I hope Volume 2 might unpack a bit. So when you're building a narrative universe like this, what devices do you opt to ground in science, and which do you allow to be fantastic or magical in nature? Is there a line you draw in setting those boundaries where you're piecing things together? Is the sky the limit for characters in superpowered settings? Like, what do you need to anchor to certain parts of reality?
Yeah, I think some of it is about the tone you're trying to set. And for Inferno Girl specifically, we wanted it to be, as much as it's a book about kind of the bad state the world is in and how close it feels like it is to going off the edge, also present a vision of the future that feels like it's worth saving. And in that, our setting of Apex City, it is a little utopian. It's not perfect, but there are a few steps ahead of us in a bunch of different ways.
Right.
Technologically, yes, but also socially and in the way that they build for the community, the way the schools work, that sort of stuff. So that sort of came from the core themes of the book. And when it comes to sort of the more magical and superpowered elements of it, again, I think it's about building from the theme. Like, especially being inspired by Tokusatsu, it kind of guides you to make the magic the transformative element, where you have characters who are real and are trying to do a real, understandable human thing, but when they need to become more and sort of express themselves in the most extreme way, the magic gives you the ability to express that through a creative lens.
Right.
And then when it comes to like how far do you push it, I'm a really big believer in, as long as it feels true to the story, then it'll be fine. It's only when people get confused or it's too elaborate. And for that, I just come back to, like, readers will generally give you one major buy-in. And I think in this book, it is that the power of belief can manifest and do like very transformative things. And then everything else sort of like funnels out from that. But if I said that, but also completely unrelated, there's a teleporting llama that moves around the city, people will be like, oh, is that related to the other thing? Like, how do those two things interact? Which means that it would probably be a bridge too far.
Yeah, nesting it within the narrative. And
Exactly.
Speaking of boundaries to the narrative world, I don't want to beg spoilers off of you, but now that Volume 2 is coming to readers, do you have an idea of how long a run you'd like to roll out to complete Cassia's character arc as part of the massive verse? Are you planning spin-offs or leaving things open-ended or planning on neatly tying things off at a certain point? Do you have that in mind already?
Definitely have an ending in mind.
Okay.
Again, kind of inspired by Tokusatsu. Like, I never wanted to make it a never-ending machine. Largely because
Power Rangers has done that very successfully.
Absolutely they have, and good on them. But even within that, like, especially now, they're following the Sentai model where you spend a year with a group of people and you experience their story and then that's over, and then you move on to a new group of people. It's not like Spider-Man where it's just sort of perpetual. So yeah, I have an ending in mind for Cassia. I have a number of books in mind that, we'll see if we get to. It's all very book by book at the moment, but there's definitely a plan there. And we want to try and stick to that if at all possible. And we have like thoughts about how we might expand the story, but that's always balanced against that desire to make it as accessible and streamlined as possible. So if we do anything, we never want that to compromise your ability to go into a bookshop and very cleanly and clearly understand how to read the book. But working with Kyle in particular, he's a guy who pushes you to think big and leads by example himself. Like, one of his other massive verse books, No One, is a kind of superhero crime noir murder mystery, and every issue that comes out is accompanied by an in-universe podcast that is released. And the hosts of the podcast are played by Patton Oswalt and Rachel Lee Adams, and the production quality is absolutely impeccable. And for Radiant Black, he did an animated short film that was a big surprise. So it's hard to not be
I did see that, yeah.
Yeah,
that was cool.
It's so cool. It's hard not to be taken in by that desire to experiment, and swing for the fences. So yeah, we have stuff in mind in that way for sure.
Fantastic. So yeah, and speaking of cross-media production, hot on the heels of the successful campaign for Inferno Girl Red, you've launched a campaign with designer Kelly McMahon for Bad Blood. You mentioned card games earlier. This is a Prohibition-era card deck and murder mystery with a tie-in comic. So Kelly's worked on the Radiant Black tie-in, Radiant Pink, and Nicoletta Baldari is involved as a tie-in Ashcan comic illustrator for a story that you've written. How did this project pop up and come together amidst all of the other things that you're doing?
It was a strange one. It all started with Kelly. So Kelly is an incredible designer and artist, and she had previously done a gorgeous deck of cards that she kickstarted as well, that had a sort of light narrative element to it, that she worked with someone else on. And when she started on the next one, she had the idea of there being a murder mystery element to it, but wasn't really sure how that would work or the mechanics of it. And I knew her through conventions. We'd met and chatted, and, big fan of her work and her as a person. So when she reached out and said, like, hey, would you like to do this? I was like, I would love to, but I don't know how. Like, I don't know what this is. But she was like, yeah, I'm sure you'll figure it out. And yeah, I just dove in and tried to figure out what this thing could be. And what we arrived at, I think sort of, again, it's my desire to have pure experiences. We never wanted to compromise the fact that these playing cards by themselves are just great playing cards and use them to play poker or whatever you want. But I realized that in writing a journal of a journalist investigating a murder and all of his notes of the suspects, and the suspects being the face card characters on the cards, we could create a situation where you read through the journal, you learn about these characters, and then you can look at the cards yourself to try and find clues or try and understand the nature of these people. And with those two things put together, we could build a murder mystery into it, with the benefit of once you've solved the mystery and that's all done, you understand these characters as people and how they interact in the world that they live in. So next time you are playing poker, you're not just looking at card art. These are characters that you know and, have some investment in. So I was really excited.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really excited by that prospect. And the opening part of it was difficult to figure out. It was a lot more like game design than writing, really. But once I nutted that part out, it was just a different form of narrative storytelling, and one that I really enjoyed.
Cool. And I'm curious about that. And given the period setting and how heavy an Art Deco tone her designs have in Bad Blood, how does it change the approach to story and characterization when you're stepping outside the mechanics of a superhero narrative? beyond, the inspiration provided by the designs, what did you draw upon for Joseph Field as a protagonist and the cast of characters he encounters? I mean, there's, Agatha Christie and Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. Did you like pick up and flip through some old noir and detective stuff, or what was what factored in?
I think I've had through cultural osmosis, a lot of that kind of seep in. And also like a big love of Sherlock Holmes. I actually have my collected editions.
Cool.
And I think what I was struck by when reading Sherlock for the first time was how fun it is. I think in my mind, I had expected something very clever and literary, but a bit of a slog because of how old it is. But they're fun and pulpy, and they motor. Like they're so well paced. They're just exciting, and I think that's what I wanted to bring to this. And there's a bit of like Knives Out, Glass Onion to it. Like the more eccentric the characters are, and particularly because the structure of a murder mystery means that even characters who aren't central to the plot, you have a narrative reason to build a lot into them because you want people to be so fascinated by even unimportant characters because you want them to think maybe they are the important characters,
Right.
So it means like everyone's got to be interesting because anyone could be the person. So I think, that was sort of the mix of influences. And then, as you alluded to, it's just pulling from the art and Kelly Center's style. And it's just so cool, and I think that's not necessarily my natural mode, but I wanted to try and match that cool factor. Everyone's so glamorous and everyone has a knife behind their back and a card up their sleeve. I wanted to try and capture some of that danger and allure in it.
Yeah, and I mean, whodunit stories in general, you want to break with conventional narrative structure wherever you can. So
absolutely,
yeah. Speaking of which, I've made it a mainstay of my written interviews to ask creators what they're into beyond the immediate influences on their current work. So, what other art and media has been catching your eye these days? Before we bring things to a close, are there any comics, films, art, etc., that you'd like our viewers to make sure that they don't miss because you've been enjoying it so much?
Yeah, I mean, this is the one that's kind of been dominating my attention for a little bit. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the NBC sitcom The Good Place. It's from...
I'm familiar with it. I've seen probably about a season's worth peppered. I watch it on an airplane sometimes as well.
Totally.
I'm like, I like that show, but I haven't followed the whole narrative. Tell me more.
So that show is about moral philosophy. It's also just very fun, but it's got a moral philosophy core. And the creator of the show, Mike Shaw, who also worked on Parks and Rec and The Office and a few other things, has written a book called How to Be Perfect. It's an ironic title. Okay. It's kind of like an idiot's guide to moral philosophy and how you navigate the desire to be a good person with all of the conflicting everything in the world. And it's been really helpful for me as someone who could sometimes struggle with reading academic papers on philosophy. It's a very fun way into thinking about very big picture stuff. And as a writer, I think that's very fertile ground to explore, to be thinking about fundamental questions of human nature. There's always going to be story ideas there. So I recommend that if you're curious about diving deeper into philosophy. It's an approachable way to do it.
I took my first philosophy class ever for my doctoral level studies, and I was asking after the first reading, is this what you would give an undergrad student when you're starting out? And they said absolutely not. So I kind of jumped ahead, and it would be good background reading probably to go back and take a more broad approach to it.
Absolutely, that's certainly what I needed.
Yeah, anything else that you'd like to mention? Films or music?
Yeah, man. This is show how behind I am on everything, but I recently watched Andor. Andor was great.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of revitalized my appreciation for what can be done in sort of massive world franchises. It just felt so relevant and vital but yeah, between like day job work and comics work, I've been so swamped under that I have a to experience pile that's absolutely astronomical, and I'm excited to finally experience these things when I have some more free time.
If you're at a point in your career where you're writing more books than you're reading, you're probably doing all right. So
yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. I never want to like fall too far into that trap because you become very insular, but you know, it is a privileged position.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's good seeing the fruit of your labors. Thank you so much for making time, Matt. It looks like you'll be busy prepping Volume 2 for readers after the successful Kickstarter campaign, so congratulations. If you've got social media or other sites you'd like those viewing to visit, just let us know where to go, and I'll make sure we include that, and I'll try and add links in the comments.
Awesome. I'm at Matthew Groom on Twitter, 1T in Matthew, and matgroom.com is my website if you want to follow all the stuff I'm working on.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time. I hopefully will figure out how to end this recording successfully. I think I can pause it and allow us to sign off properly.